I think some of the more hardcore genres, like proper RPG or 4X strategy, and sometimes these games have much lower day one retention. Like I've seen some games that have like 25 to 30% day one, but they've got like a 15% day 30. So
Yeah.
like I was saying, it's kind of about the retention curve and the shape of the curve rather than the early stage metrics. But day one and day three does not have any real weight anymore. You could have 55% day one.
Welcome to another episode of Tenjin ROI 101. I'm Roman from Tenjin, and I'm joined today by John Wright. Hi, John.
Hey Roman, thanks for the invite.
Always a pleasure. Today's topic is publishing, and I couldn't find a better guest. So, John, maybe a few words about yourself?
Yeah, cool. So if you're not familiar with me, guys, I'm basically someone who's been in the gaming space in one way or another for the last about 15 years. Started off my career in effectively performance marketing, user acquisition, monetization within the game space. So working at companies like Iron Source and Unity. And during that time, I was very fortunate to work with some of the biggest gaming companies in the world, and essentially help the strategic deployment of billions of dollars in spend for clients and some of the biggest names in games. And the last couple of years, I pivoted to my area of passion, which is actually working on the games themselves. So I was vice president of mobile games at Quali, working with a team of 200 people, developing games, publishing games, and that was my last big position. The last couple of months, I went to the dark side, and now I'm officially an independent consultant working with studios and game tech providers to improve their businesses, grow their games, and all in all, I love what I do, and it's an amazing job.
Awesome. And John posted like a series of posts on LinkedIn about publishing, and not only publishing, I think all sort of stuff, like, right? There were like 10 posts. Also, he has done a video on almost each of them. And I thought like, okay, let's add a special ROI one-on-one twist to it. So we've designed those slides, and now we'll jump into them and have a conversation about this topic.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just going to talk over some of the things that publishers are looking for, what the developers need to do to get published and ultimately receive investment. And we're just going to have some fun going over some really interesting talking points, and Roman's going to try and keep me on my toes and ask some hard questions, hopefully. So,
Yeah.
look, without further ado, I'll share my screen, we'll get the slides up, and then we'll hopefully create a good talking point for the people watching. So, let's see.
Yeah, I initially called it how to evaluate if your game idea is ready for publishing. And that would be like very interesting if you find any difference between a developer pitching their game to a publisher versus a game developer starting to self-publish. So that
Yeah.
would be an interesting.
Yeah, so look, there is definitely differences, and I'm a big fan of self-publishing if you can do it. The issue with today's market is so much more difficult to launch a game, and the publishers, Roman, have the resources, the money, the
Yeah.
expertise, the tech. Solo devs and small devs can be successful, but I would say it's easier for a solo dev to be successful on Steam than it is mobile.
Ah,
But we can talk about that, a bit more as we go through some of the slides. And yeah, but it's an interesting point. I think ultimately, I would say if you had an amazing game and the metrics were fantastic, and you had the accessibility to cash flow to do your own UA, like that would be the priority, because you as the developer would earn so much more money rather than establishing a publishing partnership where you have to give away a big rev share. But like I said, I think in the hyper casual era, that was possible, and there was loads of companies that really sort of like found themselves and found success during that hyper casual boom. But post ATT, you know, those companies have become few and far between. And very sadly, Roman, it feels like the big guys and the big publishers are the ones that are winning, right? There seems to be, if you look at the top 100 games in the market, and if you remove, you know, let's say like the strategy RPG, the hardcore games by Tencent, like Honor of Kings and you know, Namco Bandai, Dragon Ball Z Dokkan, and these guys that, you know, who self-publish, the new names are becoming fewer, and the density and that sort of consolidation is becoming thicker, right? Mm-hmm. So sadly, it's not as competitive, I would say, from a new game or new studio perspective as it was a couple of years ago. Like when companies like Rollick and Homer and Voodoo really came to market, they were the small guys. Now they're the big guys, but again, it feels like there's less variety of names on that list. If you go to Sensor Tower and you look at the top 100, you know, you're not seeing as many variety of names as you were a couple of years ago, because the unit economics got so much more difficult for studios. So, but we can talk about this particular topic all day. Let's go into the deck and go from there. But look, so. First things first, when you are evaluating either your own game or you're thinking about working with a publisher, the first and most important thing is the prototype of the game itself. And, you know, depending on terminology, some people could call this an MVP, so minimal viable product. Some people call it a prototype. Some people can call it a vertical slice or a build. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing. It's an early stage project where people are starting to evaluate the important things. And the most important thing for the prototype is the core loop itself. Is it sticky? Is it engaging? Do we feel like perhaps we're onto something here? Right? And this could be something that is either innovation, and innovation is something completely new, right? Like looking at last year, we saw Rollick with Twisted Tangle and this whole rope mechanic, right? And Screw Jam, and we saw these new sort of innovation-y type physics models, which allowed these new styles. And then you also see like Plus One, and the Plus One is taking something that already exists and changing it slightly to create a new game, right? So it's not a copycat. There is change and there is evolution, but it's different to something completely new, right? And you could argue, you know, Match 3D is an evolution of Match 3, right? And that's the sort of Plus One strategy. But again, from a prototype perspective, the really important things are, what's the core loop? Is it engaging? Do we feel like we've got something here? And then ultimately the art style and the design show the character of the game. And the combination of those things should give you a USP, a unique selling point. And the same as, you know, going to a VC or a private equity, you're looking for something that grabs people, that has some sort of uniqueness, that people think that we can invest in, right? It's the initial experience, the feeling you get when you have it. So, yeah, really important that, you know, your prototype sings these things.
Because it's 2025, I need to ask AI question to you.
Sure. No problem, dude. Ask away.
So, yeah, I can imagine now someone like, what's the term? Vibe coding?
Vibe coding, yeah.
Vibe
it's
code.
a whole thing now,
Yeah, vibe code a prototype. Maybe you've already seen something like that, or do you see if that's a future? Yeah. Oh, you did.
I have. I saw it last week with a company who basically had, if they didn't have a CTO, they don't have someone who could write code, and they had a really good idea for an app. And they decided that, you know, using a combination of ChatGPT, Midjourney, Cursor, they kind of put together like, it wasn't a great looking prototype, but it was a prototype, right? Like it was something that worked and it showed you the design. So there's going to be a whole new element of creativity coming from non-technical people, which will help establish prototypes. And we're probably going to see more prototypes now in the future because of how easy it is to create by these sort of AI tools. But the issue with that is quantity does not always build quality, right? So my opinion, very simply, is people can vibe code, but like if you feel like you've got something and you're onto something, you're still going to need like an amazing Unity engineer or an Unreal 5 person to build it, right? You're not going to be able to create a market leading product that's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars, in this way.
But still good enough for prototype.
Good enough for prototype. I completely agree with you, that dude, and I like I said, I'm starting to see it. People who never in the past were able to build a prototype, but again, some good ideas people are not technical people, right? Some people can come up with an idea, but previously they were restrained by not having the technical ability to put what's in their head into a prototype, and now that's changing. So I think it's definitely a trend that I think we're seeing at the beginning, but it's gonna, by the end of the year, I think everyone is going to be vibe coding prototypes and looking to do that as part of a process to get money from a publisher or a VC, etc.
Yeah. And on the other side, poor publishers. They'll have so many prototypes now, and that'd be a completely different ball game to find anything good.
Yeah, look, the number of tests you're going to have to do is going to go up, which means that publishers are going to spend more money to validate and do due diligence. And look, the publishers are going to have better infrastructures and processes to be able to handle this. But these sort of industry events force people to become better, stronger, more efficient, faster. It's not a bad thing. It's how our industry continues to evolve and grow. So, publishers will have to adapt, but they always do. And if you would go back to the hyper casual days, we had loads more prototypes during the hyper casual boom than we do today. So even if the increase in volume by vibe coding goes up, it probably still will be less than what we had during hyper casual. The difference is the quality of the games and the robustness of the games they're much bigger now than the hyper casual stage. So that means every game takes more time to review because there's more to it. So, but yeah, it's good. It's a good point, dude. I like that.
Yeah. Thanks for answering.
Cool. So look, going into the next stage, very simply, after you've built a prototype, the next milestone that the publisher or you as an individual studio want to look at is the quality. And normally it goes in like a 1-2 process. So firstly, you focus on the retention and the earlier stage retention. And then the more you work on the project and the more the retention as an early indicator of success is looking good, there is a direct correlation to monetization, right? If the session length is higher, that's more ads shown. If and subsequently this impacts LTV and ARPDAU, etc., etc. But let's break it down. So I've gone through the prototype stage. I feel like we've got a great game, but in an early stage, and we need to start adding content, right? We need to start working on what the game is going to look like as a finished product rather than just an idea. Is that adding metagame? Is that adding community aspects? Is it building out a P versus P system, or using quantum photon or something like that? Like, these are all the things that you as a team have to figure out, right? Like, what is the roadmap of the game? And each part of that roadmap is broken down to those different milestones. And again, if we say the first milestone is the retention build, the major focuses, very simply, are increasing the retention to as much as possible, right? So more people playing the game and staying around equals a higher likelihood of creating a monetization success. Because, again, the higher the session, the more ads shown, the more people coming back, more opportunities to do in-app purchases, more ads shown, all this whole combination. But yeah, if I was looking at a retention build, I would look at three things really. The first thing is a day one retention above 35%. I would look at a session length of 20 minutes or above, and I would look at a CPI of probably under $1.50. And these are but the first indications of that the game has some potential. And if you can hit those three things, that's when you know that you're progressing forward. And again, you're adding that additional content. Things like meta is so important in today's market because it gives the ability for users to come back and gives them another reason to come back. It gives them a change of scenery. So it's not just about the core game, which potentially could become quite boring after playing it so much. There's the opposite to this, which is like match 3 is the most simplistic type of mechanic in the world, and yet people play it for thousands of levels, right? King has tens of thousands of levels in Candy Crush, etc., etc. But yeah, you're trying to create drivers for users to come back for day 3 and day 7. And again, once you've got like an LTV curve of day 1 35% or to above, right? So normally by the time you're starting building out the more later stage retention and adding the content, you want the day 1 to go up to 40% plus. You want the day 3 to be 20% or above, and then you want the day 7 to be 10% or above. And if you can do that, your ARPDAU and your financial metrics will be stronger. And then it comes down to, very simply, it's the unit economics balancing of games. Is the CPI or CAC lower than the LTV? And if the LTV is above the CAC, that means you have a profitable game. And at that point is when you move to the next stage and you start thinking about soft launch. And soft launch is relatively an easy concept to understand. It's how much can we scale whilst keeping the balance of the unit economics in favour of profit rather than loss. So if at the end of the monetization tests you're making 50% margin, that means you can scale, i.e. increase the CPI to get volume on different networks, different countries, different channels, whilst also hitting your margin goal. But the thing that everyone needs to remember is as soon as you start scaling, CPIs go up. So, if in the previous stage you had 20% margin and then you wanted to scale, you'll find yourself at a point where probably you're going to cap out, right? And you can't scale anymore because you're not going to make profit, and then you have to reduce it. And that is what we call the glass ceiling. That is where your game hits where it can possibly go to, and you can't scale it up unless you then start doing things like very rigorous creative optimization, right? And bringing the CPI down. But the balance of soft launch is very simple. You test in limited markets, you validate more of the long-term metrics, you redefine your UA strategy, your networks. Do you want to test AppLovin versus Unity? Do you want to test US versus China? But you want to find that buffer of profitability that says to you that the game has the ability to go to that next level of scale whilst maintaining money, or the ability to generate money. And then finally, the thing that we all hope we get to, hard launch. And what is hard launch? Hard launch, very simply, is removing the handcuffs of the performance marketing team and the growth team and saying, yalla, go for it, guys. Spend in as many places as you possibly can. iOS, Android, US, global tier 3 markets, AppLovin, Unity, DSPs, rewarded networks. Go and spend as much money as you can as long as there's profit. And years ago, it was a whole different strategy, Roman. It was like, okay, we know that the game's going to be successful. Let's go live with as many things as possible all at once. And it was about getting the game into the top of the charts and the organics and, you know, all of this offset. You know, I remember doing loss generating UA because I knew that there was a K factor of 30%. So I was willing to lose 10% on the UA, so spend 10% more than I should, because I know that the K factor of 30% would still mean I hit a 20% margin, right? Now it's a very different landscape for the growth teams. It's test, you know, step by step, optimize the shit out of things, you know, like it's like, you know, you've got to really double down on how success looks like in the most individual of sources. And then we also have, like, you know, ROAS optimization as standard now, right? So AppLovin, Unity, Facebook, all of these things have, you know, the ability to target certain events, if that's ROAS day 7, etc. So it's a lot more complex. It's a lot more, I would say, longer, right? So it's, you know, it's not as easy as it once was to get to the top of the charts. It takes more work. And fewer games launch because of it. But this is where everyone wants to get to. You know, we want to be hard launching games.
Yeah. From your experience, like looking at these 4 steps, just a ballpark number of how many games went from prototype to the test, the retention test, basically.
Yeah.
And then how many got to the soft launch and how many got to the hard launch?
It's a great question, Roman. So it really depends on the genre of game and the strategy that you're operating. Publishers have 2 main strategies, which is hunting and farming. Hunting is like you're sourcing people, are going out and finding the best quality games possible. Farming is having a submit your game on your website. So it really depends on the strategy and the balance. But I would say if you're a big publisher, you're operating both, and you're probably getting anywhere between a couple of hundred games a month to potentially 1,000 or above if you're a bigger publisher. And, you know, if you're getting, let's keep it nice and easy and say 1,000 submissions. Out of the 1,000 submissions, probably 98% are like just not looking good, right? And then you've got probably about 2% that have some potential and you need to test properly rather than just doing some basic testing. And the publisher a lot of the time will test most of the games as long as they fit a certain criteria, but there's very few that have the ability to go the distance. And, you know, the questions you've got to ask yourself is like, is this going to make, depending on the size of your publisher, is this going to make 25 million, 50 million, 100 million? Because, you know, publishing is also, a game of spreading many bets, and each bet is costing a certain amount of money, right? And you need, same as the VC landscape, you know, most VCs invest in 20 companies to have one exit, and that one exit pays for the other 19 investments. It's the same thing for publishing, right? Like, you know, I'm spending a lot of money testing a lot of different games, and some of them will, or there'll be, hundreds of thousands of pounds of cost associated to them, covering the burn rate, and some of them will go all the way to soft launch and then die. And some of them might cost millions of dollars to get to the point of killing it, right? So yeah, look, if out of 1,000 games, 1 to 2% will get through, no more than 0.1% will ever actually get to soft launch. And then, if you're talking, 1,000 games a month, if you're lucky, you're probably going to hard launch with about 1 to 2 games a quarter. So it's sub 1% is the barrier of success, and this is the nature of publishing, right? You're really trying to invest a lot of time and money into a lot of different people, but knowing that the funnel will only spit out one real contender,
right?
In a quarterly basis. And and again, during the hyper casual age, you could launch a game once a week. Like
Yep.
Quali were launching games 10 times a quarter, dude. But things changed, and this is where we are today. It's a lot harder.
Gotcha.
Cool. And then look, again, we spoke a little bit around these like metrics earlier, but I just want to detail them a bit more because I think it's very important to show people what actually the publisher's looking for. So again, your retention rates is all about your LT or your retention curve. And what you don't want is in this day and age is to have 0% after day 7, right? You need to show a more mellow curve over a longer period of time, because the longer the curve, the more opportunities to make money, and the better the monetization. So yeah, if I were you, looking at 35 to 40% day 1, 20 to 25% day 3, 10 to 15% day 7, and anything kind of north of 5% for day 30, depending on your genre of game, is a good indication, right? But in this day and age, no one wants to hear that the game is dead before a month, right? If you're seeing 100% of users drop off before 30 days, that's probably not going to go the distance.
Would you say that's universal, or is there like, of course, benchmarks per genre?
Mm.
But what would be your kind
Yeah,
of
look,
suggestion?
it's a really good question, dude. I think some of the more hardcore genres, like proper RPG or 4X strategy, and sometimes these games have much lower day one retention. Like I've seen some games that have like 25 to 30% day one, but they've got like a 15% day 30. So
Yeah.
like I was saying, it's kind of about the retention curve and the shape of the curve rather than the early stage metrics. But day 1 and day 3 does not have any real weight anymore. You could have 55% day 1, but if you're day 7 0, it doesn't matter, right? So it's about the shape of the curve rather than having like an outstanding early metric, which a lot of people still to this day just don't understand. People are like, oh my God, we've got 50% day 1, we're going to make loads of money. And then the publisher says, sorry guys, like we're not going to sign this. Because it was how years ago people validated things, right? It was like, if the day 1's good, then we're in business. It's not the same anymore. And then, yeah, if I was looking at monetization metrics, I think depending on the genre and the geo, anything between 0.3 and 0.5 ARP DAO with a good retention curve means that your LTV will be anywhere above $2. And again, what we're trying to do here is the CPI below 150, the LTV above $2, and that 50 cents is our margin, right? And the idea is that over time, the product team will continue adding content, more features, and the LTV will go up. But equally, the CPI will probably go up because, competitiveness and the more scale, the more the CPI goes up. And it's very much about balancing this unit economics. And then conversion rates to paying users. Extremely important in a hybrid monetization world that we live in now, right? It's not just all about ads. It's about what percentage or ratio is your IAP revenue. And really important that you have a decent percentage to converting users that power that IAP revenue, because the IAP revenue is more secure than the ad revenue. The ad revenue can change at any moment, right? So really important you give yourself that security from the IAP revenue.
You just stole my question. I just wanted to ask about the RPDAO and the value of in-app purchases versus but
really,
your answer.
It's really important, dude. Look, if you the what people really want is like a 50-50. I can tell you now, I've probably seen only a handful of games that actually succeeded with 50-50. But if sometimes it will be 60-40, sometimes it will be 40-60. But I think if you're getting more than 25-30% of in-app purchases as the revenue breakdown, you're in a good place.
Got it.
And then look, the engagement and performance stuff is really simple. Like, you want as many daily sessions as possible. You want as high as total session, as possible. So session length times frequency equals total session. And then you want like a good ratio of about 20% of your DAO to your MAU. So, you want people coming back and playing the game again, but you also want, as many variety of people coming back as well. But if you can get 20-25% of people playing consistently, then it's a good metric that the game has enough to keep people and that replayability and coming back, time and time again. And then, so in terms of the second rule that I'm looking at, it's like, strong metrics lead to stronger publisher confidence and ultimately higher levels of investment for you as a developer. And that confidence comes from, creating a relationship and a rapport and creating a belief system that, the publisher and you are working together. If you try and take the publisher relationship as just an ability to get money and they are just a check, it's never going to work, dude. Like, the publisher is investing not just money into this, but they're investing so much resources. And remember, the individuals in the publisher, like the producers and the product managers and the UA people, they're invested in this personally, right? They want to also say to their friends and other people in the industry that they're launching successful games using their expertise and experience. So it's really important that, you go into this process knowing that. And look, there's a couple of good tips here, but setting realistic goals, it doesn't help anyone to basically overshoot and create an environment where people are going to fail rather than succeed. So discussing this on both sides and giving input is so important. Obviously, leverage the in-game metrics as much as you can. So if you're a developer and you're going to a publisher and you want the best deal possible, like, the better the game metrics, the more desirable the project, the more power you have to negotiate. So sometimes it's smarter to wait a little bit longer and invest a bit more of your own money to get the metrics in a better position, because then you'll create competition and what you want is a couple of publishers all wanting to sign the game. Play testing is something that is so underrated, and you wouldn't be so surprised how people are not actually independently play testing their games. People end up playtesting their own games, and there is an unnatural sense of bias, which is, my game's amazing, it's super easy, everyone gets it, and then you do an independent playtest with like Playtest Cloud, and you see the results are far different through what your catchment audience or your ideal customer profile or user profile is versus what your developers who built the game are doing. And so, like, please playtest your game independently. Go use Playtest Cloud. They're a fantastic company with an amazing service. Iteration is also super important. In this day and age, you need to, don't work on the same project for 2 years, because you'll just run out of money and die. Be open to pivot. Take on feedback. Understand that maybe the project in its current capacity will not be the one that goes to market. So that feedback, that honesty, that's where the publisher comes in, because the publisher's looking holistically across loads of genres, loads of games, loads of studios. So listen to your publisher when he's talking about iteration and changing things, because trust me, he's doing it for a reason. It's not because he doesn't like your game, it's because he's seen something that indicates that if you do it, you're probably going to have more success. And then communication is at the forefront of everything. If you know that something's going wrong, i.e. someone's resigned, someone's going to get married or has been sick, or something's wrong with the code, don't hold that back from the publisher. Be transparent and create that relationship, because trust me, when you run out of time, and you will run out of time, the publisher has the ability to terminate the contract based on a breach of the milestone. So don't think holding this back is going to help you. It won't. It will really hurt you. So if something's going wrong, tell them. Be transparent. It's really important.
John, I really need some anonymous horror story about working with a publisher or working with a specific...
Oh, man. A unanimous horror story. I'm trying to think of something... something that has gone wrong majorly. Oh God, no, I'm trying to think of something that will actually be educationary for the audience rather than just a random crazy story. I once had to put a clause in a contract when the war in Ukraine kicked off. I was working with a developer in in Ukraine, and they basically said like, look, we're really sorry, but we have to do an addendum to update this so that if a missile hits the office, that we're not going to be sued for not finishing the game. And honestly, Roman, at the time I was like, this what is he talking about? This is like, this can't actually happen. Like, this is sounds like something out of a movie. And we actually did end up updating the contract and honouring it because of the war, and so that was probably the most crazy thing that ever happened. But that's, again, if you're Ukrainian, that's something that you've had to deal with for the last couple of years. So apart from that, I would say, dude, there's always a lot of people that oversell and say they're going to build the best thing ever, and eventually they try and kick the can down the road and make things look good, and they miss the deadlines, and eventually they're like, oh, it's okay, we've been doing this long enough that the publisher's going to just put up with it, and the publisher won't. The publisher again is dealing with so many different projects that if your project's not going well, they'll kill it to have more time for other ones that are going well. So this is where the communication piece is so important.
Gotcha.
Cool. And then, look, this is a little bit more maybe about what I just discussed, but you need to be agile. You need to make sure that you're being unbiased when it comes down to data and feedback. And it's just so important to maintain transparency on the project. And like I said, both sides, the publisher and the developer, are throwing time and money and resources to building the best game possible. And sometimes people just, they've been working on this game for a couple of years. They think they believe that it's going to go the distance. And that's what kills the game's ability to launch, right? And this is why it's so important to ensure that you do listen to feedback and you do evolve the game to things that are currently performing well and the publishers are seeing holistically. And it's just such an important thing. But like I said, if we look at the basics here, so make sure you're listening, because it will help you hit the soft launch KPIs. And if you hit the soft launch KPIs, then you're moving to hard launch. And look, no developer makes money outside of the burn coverage in soft launch, right? The way that the developer makes money through the rev share model is by scale. So if you want to, make a load of money so you can self-publish next time, right? Listen to the publisher, make sure you hit the soft launch metrics by any way, okay? And then polish and optimize. Like I said, sometimes the game in its current form will not be the final one. Sometimes you take a deviation on maybe not the core mechanic, but it could be the theme, right? Maybe you'll change it from a hotel theme game to a gym theme game, or a cafeteria theme game, or a restaurant theme game, or maybe it'll be a jungle theme game, an Arctic game, a penguin game. Like there's a million ways to reskin games and artwork to change the theme and the design whilst keeping the core mechanic true to the original origins. So that polish and optimize, part of that is coming through that stage. But ultimately, it's just keep working on the game, making it the best experience for your users, and the better the quality, the better the results, most of the time. Aligning with the publisher strategy, again, is really important. So understanding and asking questions about what the publisher is doing and why. Because then you can align what your company is doing to the same vision. And that's how you create culture, a mutual culture between the developer and the publisher. So it's really, really important. And again, that will help you lock down the partnership. What you want to create is a multi-game deal. You want to have security in your studios for years to come, and knowing that the publisher has your back, and the publisher knows that they're getting amazing, highly quality assets from an incredible studio that they can one day perhaps purchase. And that's what Voodoo was doing for years, right? Voodoo was like working with these studios and then saying to them, if you hit these metrics, we will acquire you for this amount of money. And then that's why Voodoo have studios all over the world now, right? Turkey and France, obviously France originally, and loads of other places. So it worked really well for them, and a lot of other companies do the same thing. And then rule 4, again, like data-driven decisions, polished execution, and clear communication lead to smooth hard launch. And again, if you think of it very simply, if you deliver on the milestones and you hit the metrics, then you're securing success from the start of the project to the end of the project. And once you're at hard launch, then comes live ops now, right? And that's a whole nother thing that we haven't really spoken about. But live operations is vital in today's success, because people don't want to create games that last for 6 months or a year. People want to create games that last for 5 to 7 years. Like, there was always this thing of evergreen games, and now there's forever games, and but all of that, like creating something iconic that lasts for years, comes from these things. And it's all about data, it's all about listening, it's all about execution and communication. And if you do all of that, you will be successful if the game has the potential, right? If the game has potential and you don't do these things, you will fail. So it's just really important, Roman, for people to do all of that stuff. And that's it.
Yeah, I have a question, like also on the topic of relationship between the developer and publisher.
Yeah.
Especially the guys that just starting, they might be afraid to go to a publisher and saying like, oh, this is a genius idea. I don't want them to steal it.
Yes, I mean, look, at the end of the day, like, publishers are businesses, and they have there's like strong legal frameworks in place so that things like IP theft cannot exist. This is why we have things like NDAs, and the developer, if you're concerned that perhaps you're speaking to a publisher and the publisher isn't saying, oh, here's an NDA, then it should come from you, right? You send the NDA to the publisher, and that will give you the legal support that you need if anything goes wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say some publishers that haven't copycatted a game in the past, because that has obviously happened. We've seen court cases about it, but I think a lot of people would be shocked at just how rare it actually is. And again, it's because of this like +1 strategy. When Screwjam came out, there was about 8 or 9 other similar games in the market, but each one of those copycats operated a +1 strategy, so all of them were slightly different.
You're right.
And luckily for Screwjam, I think they were the first and the most successful. So there obviously is a benefit of being the first to market with the concept and the idea and having the innovation. So, but yeah, I wouldn't worry about that too much, Roman. It does happen, but as long as you know your legal, position, and you're doing things like NDAs and ensuring that everything is reviewed by a lawyer, etc. Like normally you're okay.
Gotcha. So I leave our audience to ask more questions in the comments to this video. I'll ask John, then reply to them. So please leave your comments. John, final chance to talk about yourself and how people can find you.
Yeah, dude, look, again, I'm a private consultant these days. I'm helping studios and publishers to improve their processes and grow and find more success and ultimately generate more money. Or I'm working with tech companies in the gaming space and for the same reasons. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to message me, and my ADDY is /John Wright 1987.
We will leave the link in the description.
Yeah,
so.
you can put the link in the description, but yeah, just message me on LinkedIn. I'm normally pretty active and get back to people, and I'm all about just having conversations and seeing if my experience can be applied, and if it can, then great.
Great. Then thanks so much for sharing the insights. And yeah, until next time.
Thanks for inviting me again, Roman. It was a lot of fun. Take care, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.